Christian Christmas and Jihadist Hell too. From fighting Daesh to teacher of the language of Christ. It's not easy to trust Muslim neighbors again who joined the terrorists after years fighting ISIS. Iraqi Athra Kado has returned to his job as a teacher. In his hometown, they will celebrate Christmas with masses, gatherings of friends, and family banquets. But the existential threat of radical and racist groups still looms over them. Ferran Barber, updated Thursday, December 25, 2025. The impact of ISIS on the lives of Assyrians has been devastating in the areas they occupied, says Iraqi Christian Athra Kado. Our people's lives were shattered the moment the jihadists entered the region back in 2014, he adds. From that moment on, the Christians of Mesopotamia ceased to feel safe in their homeland. And as Athra says, many lost that sense of belonging to a place that had been their home for millennia. Today, Daesh is hardly ever mentioned, even though it has not been completely defeated. But the consequences of the jihadist horror it unleashed still cast their shadows to this day. Intelligence services estimate that between 1,500 and 3,000 fighters remain, scattered in cells that operate mainly in desert, mountainous, and rural areas of Syria and Iraq, far from the urban centers they dominated in 2014. In Iraq, these sleeper cells operate especially in mountain ranges like Hamran, and in the belts connecting the provinces of Salahuddin, Kirkuk, and the Syrian border. Athra Kado had just turned 24. He is now 12 years older, and was already a respected leader within the Assyrian community. It's worth clarifying that the term Assyrians, not to be confused with Syrians, refers to the indigenous Christians of Mesopotamia as direct descendants of the ancient civilization of the same name, whose presence in these lands predated the Arab conquest by millennia. In other words, the term Assyrian is the ethnic melting pot that connects the various Christian sects of the Fertile Crescent. Even as a young boy, Athra joined the most popular nationalist party in his country, the Assyrian Democratic Movement, or ZEWA, and when ISIS burst onto the geopolitical scene of the Nineveh Plains, he didn't hesitate for a second to pick up an AK-47 and enlist in the self-defense militia that ZEWA created to fight under the Assyrian flag against the jihadist advance. From 2014 until the defeat of Daesh in Iraq, the liberation of Mosul was completed in July 2017, and the last ISIS towns in Iraq fell in December of that year. It was common for those of us covering that conflict on the ground to find him with his weapon in the ZEWA office, helping officers to provide military training to the militia volunteers NPU, or later fighting with his people in the reconquest of his land. He held no official rank, but his leadership was unquestionable. Moreover, his fluency in English and his sharp intellect made him an invaluable resource for all the Westerners who arrived in Telskov or Alqosh trying to understand what was happening. What has happened since the end of ISIS? Many Christians have chosen not to return due to the insecurity, although each city is different, says Athra. For example, most of our people did return to Baghdad, even though most of the houses were destroyed or burned. They felt reassured by the fact that security was in Assyrian hands. In Mosul, Bartella, and Tel Kaif, a few dozen families returned. And in Batnaya, it's even worse. Only about 100 out of nearly 1,000 families returned. They refused to do so not only because the city was almost completely destroyed, but also because of the presence of unreliable security forces. The Christian stronghold after the defeat of ISIS, the young Christian nationalist returned to his main occupation, teaching. Athra teaches Syriac in Teskopa, a Neo-Aramaic dialect related to Classical Aramaic that is now the liturgical and communal language of a large part of the Assyrian Christians of Mesopotamia. However, as an activist and member of a DEM, he continues to collaborate in the reconstruction of the towns devastated by ISIS. The impact of ISIS wasn't the same in the unoccupied border towns like Sharafia as it was in Baghdad, Karakosh, Bartella, Karamlesh, Telkip, Tel Kaif, Batnaya, Teskopa, Teleskov, or Mosul, but it still had an effect. Since we are the same people, and what traumatizes some of us affects us all, he explains. Athra was born and lives in Alqosh, is married and has 2 young children. His hometown is special among other things because it is one of the oldest Christian towns in northern Iraq, with roots stretching back at least to the first centuries of Christianity, when a church and a stable community already existed here around Marmika and the shrine of the prophet Nahum. Today, it is only about 4,500 or 5,000 inhabitants, mostly Chaldeans under the Vatican's jurisdiction, but for centuries it was a patriarchal seat and a refuge from Mongol, Persian, and Kurdish invasions, making it one of the enclaves on the planet where the Christian presence has been longest and most uninterrupted. A true Assyrian bastion embedded in the rock of the mountains that dominate the northern horizon of Mosul. Although our homes weren't destroyed by ISIS, we lived in fear for our families, and that created instability in our family lives, says the Syriac teacher. Many emigrated during the period when ISIS had territorial control over large parts of Iraq and Syria, and they continued to emigrate after its defeat due to pressure from the security forces that controlled the area and the unstable political situation. Which are these unreliable security forces that Athra mentions so often? On the one hand, the various branches of the Peshmerga and the security services of the Kurdistan regional government, which for years controlled the Nineveh plain as disputed territory. Many Assyrians rightly accuse them of abandoning it in 2014 to the mercy of ISIS. And on the other hand, the Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF al-Shabi, in particular Brigade 50, known as the Babylon Brigade, a group presented as Christian but composed mostly of non-local Shiites, linked to the Badr organization and accused of extortion, harassment, and sabotaging the return of the Assyrians to places like Telkip in order to consolidate their own political power in the area. I served in the NPU from 2014 to 2017, but I continued to lend a hand wherever needed until 2021, when the Babylonian movement took over and merged the Assyrian militia with the Babylonian Brigade. Athra continues. Our force is still serving in Baghdad, Karamlish, and Bartella, but on October 19th, its leadership returned to our people. During the ISIS invasion, I participated in the liberation of a village called Badana Kabir, in the Battle of Teskopa on May 3, 2016, and in the liberation of Baghdad in October 2016. This year, just like last year and the year before, and even during the 3 dark years when ISIS pressed from the south along the road down to Mosul, the Assyrians of Nineveh will once again celebrate Christmas in their own way. Nothing has prevented them from doing so to date, although in the worst years they moved the celebrations to the Enkawa displacement camps in Erbil. Traditions. Here we celebrate Christmas by getting together and visiting each other, says Athra. In 2013, a group of young people and I decorated a square in the city of Alkish to turn it into a small Christmas park where we could gather on the 25th and also on New Year's Day. We still do it now, although we've passed the torch to the younger generations. I know that other cities in the Nineveh plain do something similar. Of course, we attend Mass and prepare traditional food like pasha, kaba, or kaliha. Pasha is a hearty yet humble festive stew. It's made with lamb's head, trotters, and stomach, cooked for hours until the meat falls off the bone. Later, it's served with bread soaked in the broth. Kaba are croquettes or pastries made with bulgur wheat or rice, filled with spiced minced meat, pine nuts, or dried fruit. Kalihi completes the meal. These are small cakes filled with dates, walnuts, or coconut, which in Christian homes in Iraq are baked especially at Christmas and Easter, and offered to family and neighbors with coffee or tea. In addition to Christmas Eve and the Christian New Year, the Assyrians celebrate their own ancestral New Year every spring, Akichu, also known as Ka B'Nisan. This Mesopotamian festival marks the beginning of the year in the month of Nisan, linked to the rebirth of nature and the sowing of barley, and is commemorated today on April 1st with masses, parades, traditional costumes, and Assyrian flags both on the Nineveh plain and in the diaspora. In Iraq, Christmas celebrations serve as a brief respite amidst a reality that remains existentially threatening. Although Baghdad has declared December 25th a national holiday, and in predominantly Kurdish cities like Erbil, special security measures are deployed to ensure safety at masses and public events. The Assyrian community observes these holidays with an eye on emergency exits. They remain on edge due to the latent risk of a jihadist resurgence, the control of militias over neighborhoods and villages, the lack of employment, and a constant emigration that empties parishes. To this must be added the fact that, as Athra notes, Christian political parties maintain a constant, unequal struggle against the political parties of the two pseudo-democratic regimes that control the two portions of Iraq between which they are divided. According to the teacher, there is no freedom of expression in either the areas controlled by the Kurdish regional government or those under the central government, although the situation is slightly better in the areas administered by Baghdad. Furthermore, we continue to suffer from subtle forms of ethnic cleansing and Kurdification in the north, and face hatred from radical groups in both areas. Defeated? In his opinion, it would be naive to think that ISIS or what it represents has been defeated. Jihadism is not just one person or one group. It is a mindset, and as long as there is no educational system that changes it, there will be no rule of law capable of stopping it. And the worst part is that some of these radical and racist groups are part of the government. As individuals, we all have Muslim friends, Athra concludes. But when you consider it on a community scale, we continue to feel uneasy about the existence of radical-minded groups. History has taught us a lot about that. During the last episode, the Daesh one, we witnessed many of our neighbors joining ISIS, although there were also Muslims who did their best to protect us and not be part of the persecution. It's difficult to erase that trauma or to trust the neighbor who betrayed you again.